Hello everybody, this next video that you're about to see, unfortunately you can't see in full length because we had some technical problems with what was about an hour-long conversation today, so apologies, you're not going to get to see that until next week when we'll do the conversation again. But I do want to take the opportunity to whet your appetite with a small clip from that conversation with Josh, now a friend of mine who leads a church in London. And I want to whet your appetite because what you're about to hear next week is a longer conversation about what it would mean for a soldier, a recruit, or a trainee to go from a group of 80 down to a select few who make the whole course of just 8. What about the 72 others who drop out? I'm talking about pastors who are on the front line keeping watch over their flocks by night. The darkness is getting darker. The night is drawing in. But there's a promise of shepherds, there's a promise of pastors today. If you read Jeremiah chapter 33, the promise of restoration, when once again sheep will pass under the hands of shepherds, and the shepherds who are going to shepherd and pastor in the present and in the future, when this darkness is drawing in, will not be like the pastors that we see commonly today who love coffee and books and doing hospital visits. There is a need for a muscular pastoring, a muscular leadership in the local church, keeping watch over flocks by night. And that this is what the conversation you're about to hear next week will be about. And trust me, it's coming from somebody who knows what they're talking about as a former member of the British Armed Forces who went from a group of 80 to a small group of 8. He's now pastoring a small church in London. And I'm telling you, this is the front line. This is where the redemption of kingdom radicals is happening, and we need to be switched on.
I think that we can all invent as many reasonable sounding excuses as possible. All of us will be able to throw reasons about why we can't preach about certain topics, why we, do stuff because it's just the sensible things to do. But when you look at how Jesus and his disciples lived, it was radical, it was countercultural, and they were not afraid to ruffle feathers. And if you're in a church where everything's going well and all people are speaking well of you, then woe to you, like Jesus says. And again, guys, I don't want to be like, oh, look at me, I'm so good. I'm nothing. I'm the least of all pastors in the UK. And I'm not saying that with false humility. Like, I'm nothing. My church is tiny. I have to work 2 other jobs to keep just about financially afloat. Like, I'm nothing compared to some wonderful pastors out there. But I just want to be found faithful, and I don't want to compromise anymore. And I don't want to stick my head in the sand to live in my hobbit hole, making good excuses for why I shouldn't grab the ring and get on the road and follow my master where he's leading me to do. I've spent too long making those excuses, living in comfort, and now is the time to be radical because Jesus is coming back, and I want to be found to be faithful when he comes.
And if you imagine Jesus looking at the length and breadth of the UK and every single congregation, he doesn't look at them and the men leading them and assess it as we do.
Yeah.
He just doesn't do that.
Yeah.
And I think that's a frightening thing. If you then think about the first 3 chapters of Revelation, and Jesus stood amongst the lampstands.
In my early days, I wanted to be big in that, I wanted to like have a huge impact on lots of people, and I wanted to speak at stuff and be on stuff. But the Lord has just broken all of that in the last 5 years, and it's just there's such a glorious freedom when you give every part of yourself over to him, because you know that wherever he's put you and whatever you're doing is where he wants you to be. and the most that any of us can be is faithful, and that's ultimately what counts. So, I mean, there's a great quote from Paul Washer. I remember he said it once in a sermon, that the greatest sermon ever preached won't have been viewed on YouTube or written in a book. This, of course, outside what, one of Jesus' sermons, it would have been, by some Chinese peasant pastor to like a couple of people in a hut somewhere or something. And no, he will never get glory from it from this world, and we will never hear of it, save on that eternal day. But that is how God works. God works in the smallness, and it's wonderful.
When I think of the pastors watching over their flock by night in Luke 2, I don't think of men who just like reading books and drinking coffee and having the occasional hospital visit. I think of the guys who make it from 80 to 8, and they're having their face pummeled by some other guy, and they've got 2 black eyes, maybe a broken nose, and they're battered. If you're a church leader today in 2023 moving forwards, and you don't have symptoms of fatigue, if you don't have symptoms of bruising, if you don't have a sense of being constantly on the edge of not knowing if you can manage or cope, I'm not talking about there's a fine line here, because the Lord doesn't want us to be unhealthy in one sense, but in another sense, he doesn't want us to have a sense of constantly being composed, constantly being planned out. And there's that sense in which, what is a soldier? And that's what I mean. There's a soldier who makes it from 80 to 8, and then there's a shepherd who's keeping watch over his flock by night. The night, the temperature of the night, the risks from X, Y, all of that has an effect on the kind of pastor who's keeping watch faithfully over his flock.